A man's worth isn't written in ink but in the way he walks away when no one's clapping. If this isn't a joke, it really should be. The room stilled. Serafina Langford, CEO of Kensley Bridge Capital, stood at the head of the long marble table, résumé in hand, eyebrows arched with surgical precision, the kind of arch that could cut confidence in half. She held the single sheet of paper between two fingers as if it might wrinkle her reputation. Her tone, part amusement, part disdain, the same tone she'd used last quarter to shut down a $40 million pitch in under 3 minutes. Caleb Monroe, she read aloud, lips curling ever so slightly, former director of Strategic Finance Community Systems Division, currently employed as janitorial staff. Her team chuckled soft, careful corporate chuckles. The kind that says, "We agree with you, boss. Please don't turn that gaze on us." Sarah glanced down again. He included a cover letter. She tapped the page, in Times New Roman. Someone coughed to stifle a laugh. "What's next?" she continued. A motivational quote in Comic Sans. The laughter got bolder. No one noticed the man standing just outside the glass door, mop handle in hand, watching the reflection of himself in the polished surface as her words passed through it like knives through fog. Caleb Monroe didn't flinch. He'd cleaned this floor before any of them showed up in tailored suits and expensive perfume. He knew every scuff mark, every faulty panel that squeaked. But today, for the first time in years, he had submitted something that wasn't a maintenance report. And it had been laughed at. He turned, slowly walked back toward the service stairwell. No words, no anger, just the quiet click of boots on tile. 20 floors below, in a break room that smelled faintly of bleach and burnt coffee, Caleb sat across from his daughter. Maya Monroe, 6 years old, legs swinging from the metal chair, scribbled in her sketchbook with the seriousness of a surgeon. "I made you a new name tag," she said, pushing the paper toward him. On it she'd drawn a badge that read, "Caleb Monroe, Floor Hero." He smiled softly, letting the paper rest on the table like something sacred. "Thanks, Peanut," he said, "but I think my superhero cape's in the laundry today." Maya looked up, her gaze serious. "Why did you give that lady your résumé if she was just going to be mean?" Caleb hesitated, his hands still. Sometimes he said slowly, "You knock on a door not because you expect it to open, but because you need to prove to yourself that you're not afraid of closed ones anymore." Maya tilted her head, but she laughed. "She did," he said. "But you know what? People laugh when they don't understand something brave." Back upstairs, Sarah tossed the résumé onto the table and moved on to the next agenda item. The document lay forgotten among quarterly charts and investment briefs, forgotten by everyone except one. Ethan Bloom, senior analyst, mid-30s, sat at the end of the table, silent. He didn't laugh earlier. He knew that name. Caleb Monroe. Once, long ago, when Ethan was just a fresh-faced grad, Caleb had been one of the sharpest minds at Allied Providence, a consulting firm that had mentored half the investment world. Ethan remembered him walking into meetings like a storm in a suit, clear, composed, unshakably ethical. Then, suddenly gone, whispers, a scandal, his wife's death, a resignation no one understood. And now, a janitor. Ethan looked again at the résumé, at the crisp but humble formatting, at the signature penned without flourish. He leaned back in his chair, uneasy, not because of the man who submitted it, but because of the woman who just dismissed it. That evening, Caleb placed Maya's drawing on the fridge and began packing her school lunch. She sat on the floor, playing with a set of mismatched crayons, coloring her latest masterpiece, a tall building, a mop, and a tiny man standing beside a smiling girl. Above them, in crooked handwriting, "Daddy helps people no one sees." "Did anyone say anything about your résumé, Dad?" she asked. He paused, then gave her a gentle half-smile. "They said a lot, Maya, but none of it mattered." "Why?" "Because I wasn't talking to them," he said, placing the last sandwich in the bag. I was talking to the part of them that remembers what it's like to care. Maya blinked. Did they hear it? He looked away. Maybe not yet. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office early. Her heels clicked with the precision of someone who always arrived 10 minutes before, expected not to impress but to dominate. As she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. Margaret Hale, reminder Brentwood, visit rescheduled to Friday. Urgent discussion. Brentwood is falling apart, Sarah. They need more than numbers. They need heart. You promised both. Sarah closed the message and sighed. Heart? She had spent her whole life avoiding that word. It made people weak, unfocused, poor. She had crawled out of Brentwood on spreadsheets and sleepless nights, not poetry. As the elevator opened to the executive floor, she stepped out and froze. There it was again, the resume, placed neatly on her assistant's desk. Why is this here again? She asked, her voice sharp. Ethan appeared beside her, calm. I asked for it. She narrowed her eyes. I remember him, Ethan said simply. You should too. Why? Because he wiped your whiteboard once, she snapped. Ethan didn't flinch. Because when I was nothing, he was kind. He was the only one who noticed I skipped lunch 3 days in a row, left an apple on my desk without a word, never said it was him, just did the right thing. That resume? That's not a joke. That's someone who still believes in people. Sarah said nothing, but something in her gaze shifted just for a second. A flicker, a flash of something old, buried, dangerous. She picked up the resume again, slower this time, and for the first time, she didn't laugh. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the quietest ones carry the loudest truth. The pre-dawn sky outside their small apartment bled a soft indigo. Caleb Monroe buttoned the last cuff of his faded work shirt. The fabric still bore the scent of lemon polish and industrial disinfectant, a quiet signature of his invisible hours. His hands, rough from years of labor, moved with the precision of a man who never rushed but always arrived exactly where he needed to be. Across the room, Maya slept curled on the couch, her sketchbook rising and falling on her chest like a paper-thin heart. A blanket hung off one leg. Crayons had rolled under the coffee table. She'd fallen asleep mid-drawing again. Caleb watched her for a moment longer than necessary. Then, gently, he placed a folded note on the kitchen counter next to a banana, a thermos of warm cocoa, and a peanut butter sandwich with the crust cut off just the way she liked it. You are my sunrise. Keep your eyes kind and your words kinder. Love, Dad. He slipped out the door like a ghost. No applause. No witness. Caleb didn't like talking about the past, not because he was ashamed of it, but because most people only listened to stories they could categorize. And his didn't fit cleanly anywhere. His wife Rachel had been everything he was not: vibrant, outspoken, fearless in boardrooms and bookstores alike. She'd been diagnosed with a rare heart condition just months after Maya was born. The kind of condition that sat in legal gray zones between treatment coverage and actuarial math. Allied Providence, the firm Caleb once helped build from the inside, had denied the final treatment request. System error, they said. Not medically essential, they clarified. It took 14 days for Rachel's body to fail. It took Caleb only one to walk out of that office and never return. He traded his briefcase for a broom not because he had to, but because he could no longer stomach building anything that wouldn't hold a human life when it mattered. Morning. Monroe said Lou, the night guard, tipping his thermos in Caleb's direction as he entered the service corridor of Kensley Bridge Capital. Lou Caleb replied with a nod. Word is, your resume made it to the Shark Tank, Lou said with a crooked grin. Brave or bored. Neither, Caleb said, sliding on his gloves. Just making sure my courage still works. Lou chuckled, then paused. They laugh. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, 20 floors above, Serafina Langford couldn't shake the words Ethan had said the day before. He was the only one who noticed I skipped lunch 3 days in a row. She didn't like how that line stuck. It clung like static to the back of her brain, interrupting thoughts that used to move like clean gears. She opened Caleb's resume again, this time on her laptop. She read it without the filter of assumption. And it was good. Too good. Language precise. Financial metrics interwoven with ethical benchmarks. Strategic implementation plans built around human-centered design. A framework for nonprofit sustainability that was light years ahead of what her current board had proposed for Brentwood Haven. Who writes like this? And mops floors. She found herself opening a search tab. She typed Caleb Monroe, Allied Providence, and there he was listed on archived white papers, keynote slides, a panel at Harvard Kennedy School on community economics and financial equity. Then, nothing after 2018. A name that had vanished like smoke from a boardroom. Sarah sat back in her chair, arms crossed, breath caught somewhere between skepticism and reluctant awe. That evening, as the city folded itself into golden shadow, Caleb picked up Maya from her after-school arts program. She bounded down the front steps of the building, backpack bouncing, her cheeks lit with excitement. In her hand, she clutched a rolled-up piece of paper. "I drew us Daddy," she said, holding it out. Caleb unrolled it. Crayon lines danced across the page, a tall man with a broom and a little girl beside him, holding hands in front of a big building. Above them, in Maya's careful handwriting, "He doesn't just clean floors, he clears the way." Caleb's chest tightened. "That's powerful," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Maya smiled. "Miss Gina said maybe I'll be an artist one day. But I told her I already am. 'Cause I draw real things." Back at home, as Maya drifted off to sleep, Caleb opened a small wooden box under his bed. Inside, a single photo of Rachel, an old wedding ring he still couldn't bring himself to wear again, and a stack of folded letters. One for each of Maya's birthdays. He hadn't written the next one yet. He held up a blank sheet, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself thinking about that moment outside the conference room. About Serafina's laugh. Not the sound, but the weight of it, how easily it had dismissed something he'd spent all night rewriting. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. She didn't know about Rachel, about the system he'd once believed in, about the long nights with Maya sleeping on his chest while he studied community-led microfunding models under a flashlight because he couldn't afford electricity for 2 weeks. And yet, that laugh. It had sliced deeper than she knew. But it hadn't broken him. It had clarified something. He wasn't done yet. The next morning, as Caleb swept the lobby floor, he noticed a quiet shift in the air. People made eye contact. Some nodded. One young intern, new nervous, handed him a coffee. "For yesterday," she said softly. "Some of us, we heard." Caleb looked at the cup, then at her. "You don't need to make this right," he said gently. "Just remember what felt wrong." Upstairs, Sarah sat alone in the boardroom, papers spread out, but her focus stuck on a single sentence scribbled in red ink on Caleb's resume. Sustainability isn't about numbers. It's about making sure the light stays on for those who come after you. She picked up her phone, typed a message, deleted it, typed again. "Mr. Monroe, if you're free, I'd like to hear your thoughts on community-based budgeting. Brentwood is at risk, and I'm running out of people who care more than they bill." She hesitated, then hit send. Downstairs, Caleb's phone buzzed in his pocket. He read the message once, then again. He didn't smile. He didn't rush to reply. He simply tucked the phone away and finished sweeping the floor with slow, steady strokes. Because some doors open loudly, and others, they creak. But they still open. You can pave over your childhood, but some doors never forget the sound of your footsteps. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of the matte black Range Rover as it pulled up to the rusting iron gate. Beyond it, Brentwood Haven stood in weary silence, a 3-story relic of forgotten hope, its brick walls chipped and flaking windows smudged with the fingerprints of decades. Serafina Langford sat in the driver's seat, hands still on the wheel. The engine was off, but her thoughts roared louder than any ignition. She hadn't been here in 23 years. Not since the night she ran away at 15, a scholarship application stuffed into a second-hand backpack and a folded bus schedule clutched in one trembling hand. Back then, she told herself she'd never look back. But here she was, looking, breathing in memories she had spent years repackaging as lessons. The gate creaked open as she pushed through it on foot. The air smelled of wet leaves, mildew, and something older like childhood's never fully cleaned out. Her Louboutins weren't made for this gravel, but she walked like she owned the ground anyway. Because Serafina Langford never let anything see her hesitate. At the front entrance, a woman stood waiting, mid-60s, short white hair pulled into a bun so tight it might have held up the roof. Margaret Hale, warden, guardian, watchdog. And for a time, the closest thing to a mother Serafina ever knew. Still allergic to sentiment, Margaret said, crossing her arms. Still allergic to tact, Sarah replied without missing a beat. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. Some things don't change, good Sarah said. Then we can skip the small talk. The tour was brisk, clinical. Margaret led her through narrow hallways lined with peeling wallpaper and fading posters of cartoon animals, classrooms with wobbly desks, bedrooms with mismatched sheets, the kitchen with its humming fluorescent lights and eternally dripping faucet. Sarah took mental notes, flooring replacement, fire alarm upgrades, ventilation staff expansion. All solvable, all budgetable, but what she couldn't tabulate was the silence that pressed in around every corner. "This place is dying," Margaret finally said as they stood in the empty rec room, its carpet frayed like an unhealed wound. "It's not dying," Sarah answered. "It's just been left behind." Margaret turned. And now, the girl who ran from this place wants to save it. Sarah didn't flinch. "I didn't run. I walked out. On purpose." Margaret stared at her for a long moment. "You think a few checkbooks and a media campaign will fix what's broken here?" "No," Sarah said. "I think a system that forgets the invisible can only be rewritten by someone who remembers what it felt like." Margaret's expression softened barely. "And you remember, do you?" Sarah's eyes flicked toward the cracked window. "I remember enough to want it rebuilt." Later, seated at the old dining table that had survived 4 directors and a dozen Christmases, Margaret poured 2 cups of tea. No fancy mugs, just the old beige ceramic ones chipped at the rim. "So," Margaret said, sliding one over. "What exactly is your plan?" Sarah reached into her leather folio, pulled out a clean architectural sketch and a stack of documents. "Project Hearth," she began. "A hybrid model, half therapeutic academy, half residential care. We build new dorms, renovate the classrooms, create space for creative therapy, art, music, movement. A curriculum not just for grades, but for grief, for resilience, for trust." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Trust? I know it sounds idealistic," Sarah continued, "but I've spent the last 5 years designing community impact ventures across 8 cities. The model works. This isn't a model," Margaret said. "It's a memory, and memories have sharp edges." Sarah leaned back, her voice lowering. "That's why I'm not hiring just any analyst. I want someone who's seen both ends of the hallway." "And where do you plan to find someone like that?" Sarah hesitated. Just for a moment. Then said quietly, "I think I already have." Back at Kensley Bridge, Ethan Bloom looked up from his desk as Sarah entered unannounced. "Pull Caleb Monroe's resume," she said, dropping her bag on the corner of his desk. "And get me everything he's ever published, advised, or built in the last decade." Ethan blinked. "You want to hire him, I want to test him," Sarah corrected. "And if he passes, I want him to help me rebuild Brentwood from the bones up." Ethan smiled faintly. Big leap of faith for someone who mocked him 2 days ago. Sarah's jaw tightened. Maybe, but sometimes the person holding the mop knows exactly where the floor is cracked. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, windows open to the distant hum of city lights. On her lap was a notebook, not digital, not sleek, just old-school paper and a pen she hadn't used in years. She wrote one sentence across the top. "What would have changed if someone had listened to me at 13? The words hit harder than she expected. She stared at them, then added, "What might change now if I finally listened to someone else?" Meanwhile, in a corner of the city, quieter than most maps acknowledged, Caleb sat at the foot of Maya's bed. She was half asleep, a stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. "Daddy," she murmured. "Did the lady write back?" Caleb smiled. "She did. Is she still mean?" "She might be," he said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "But even mean people can change Peanut. Sometimes they just need to remember who they were before the world made them forget." Maya yawned. "Will you help her remember?" Caleb looked toward the window. Then down at his hands that had once signed million-dollar deals and now held paper towels and quiet dignity. "I'll try," he said softly. "But only if she's willing to hear what's never been said out loud." And somewhere in the stillness of that night, both Serafina Langford and Caleb Monroe, two strangers walking different maps of the same childhood, lay awake knowing the next time they met, something old would stir. Not just ghosts, but the blueprints of redemption. And maybe just, maybe, the first lines of a bridge they never knew they were meant to build. When a door opens for the wrong reason, walk through anyway. Just make sure you leave it better than you found it. "You want him?" Harrison Cho's eyebrows rose like a verdict. Sarah didn't blink. "I want his mind. I don't care what title's on his jumpsuit." They were standing in the executive lounge, early morning sun slanting in across untouched croissants and overpriced silence. Outside, the city roared into motion. Inside, Harrison, her chief financial officer and self-appointed reality check, was trying to talk her out of what he called a PR disaster waiting to happen. "You mocked this man in front of a dozen people," Serafina Harrison said. "Now you want to hand him your flagship community project?" "I'm not handing him anything," she replied coolly. "I'm giving him a 3-hour window to prove me wrong." "Why?" Her voice lowered. "Because for a man who pushes a mop, he carries himself like someone who used to carry more." Harrison paused, his tone softer. "You sure this isn't guilt talking?" Sarah turned to the window. "If it is, then maybe guilt's finally doing something useful." 2 hours later, in a meeting room that rarely hosted anyone without a tie, Caleb Monroe stepped into a space designed to make people feel small. Except he didn't. He stood tall in his dark gray work uniform, the name Caleb stitched above his heart. He didn't bring a briefcase. He didn't bring notes. He brought presence, the quiet kind that filled a room without needing volume. Sarah sat at the head of the table, a legal pad before her, a glass of still water untouched. "I appreciate you coming," she said. "I figured if a door creaks open, it's polite to at least peek inside," Caleb replied. There was no sarcasm, just calm honesty and a glint in his eye that said, "You don't scare me, even if this table cost more than my apartment." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her. "Please." He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "You know, I read your resume 3 times before I stopped reacting to what you are now, and started noticing what you used to build." He nodded. "Most people don't get past the uniform." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "But here we are." Caleb folded his hands. "Why am I here, Ms. Langford?" "Honestly." Sarah leaned forward, voice steady. "Because I need help fixing a place that raised me without ever really healing me. Brentwood Haven is dying, and I want to rebuild it not as a charity but as a living, breathing ecosystem of resilience. Not just math. Meaning. You wrote a funding model once for something like that in Oregon. I tracked it back to you. That was a long time ago, Caleb said. But you still know how she replied." He tilted his head. "You could have asked anyone." "I did," she said, "and they all sent estimates. You're the only one who sent truth." Caleb was quiet for a beat. "Then, you mocked that truth." 2 days ago. "I did," Sarah admitted. "I'm not proud of it. but I don't want that moment to be the last page between us." He looked at her, not angry, not wounded, just reading. "I don't want pity work," he said. "And I don't offer it," she replied. Another pause. Then Caleb asked, "Why does this matter to you?" Her throat tightened, but her answer was honest. "Because I left Brentwood with a suitcase full of fury, and I built a life so successful it made me forget how much of it started with loss. I want to build something now that remembers." Caleb's eyes softened just a fraction. "That's a good reason," he said. She exhaled. They dove in. The next 2 hours were filled with whiteboard scribbles, strategic breakdowns, and cost-benefit models that somehow felt more like stories than spreadsheets. Caleb didn't pitch. He unpacked. He spoke of emotional overhead, of the ROI of trust, of measuring progress in people who stop flinching when doors open. Sarah found herself listening harder than she had in years, not just because he was good, but because he made her better just by speaking plainly. At one point, she said, "You use empathy like it's a ledger entry." Caleb smiled faintly. "That's because it is. You just won't find it on most balance sheets." When the meeting ended, Sarah stood. So she said, brushing her palm along the edge of the table, "Will you do it?" He stood as well. "That depends." "On. Are you hiring me," he asked, "or inviting me to help rewrite something that once wrote over you?" Sarah blinked, then smiled. For the first time, not out of formality but understanding. "The latter," she said. "Then I'll help," he replied. "But I have one condition." She arched a brow. "Name it. I want to visit the place with you. Walk it, not just as an analyst, as someone who needs to feel the ghosts before he draws the blueprints." Sarah nodded slowly. "You believe in ghosts?" He looked down for a moment. "Only the ones we pretend don't shape us." That evening, Caleb picked up Maya from school. She skipped beside him, swinging her backpack. "How was your meeting, Daddy?" she asked. He glanced down at her. "You know how sometimes you think you know who someone is, and then they surprise you. Like when Miss Gina said she couldn't sing, but then she totally sang like a Disney movie." He chuckled. "Exactly like that. Was she nice?" Caleb paused. "She was listening." Maya grinned. "That's step 1 to being nice." He nodded. "And maybe step 1 to starting over." Meanwhile, Sarah sat in her office, staring out the window. The city moved below her, fast, sharp, indifferent. But something inside her had slowed. On her desk sat Caleb's old résumé. Next to it, she placed a blank sheet of paper and wrote one word at the top, "Blueprints." Then beneath it, not just for buildings, for people, for the bridges they forgot how to build. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden shadows across the glass towers, and 2 people, one janitor, one CEO, stood on opposite sides of a broken system, both finally ready to rebuild something real. To understand a place, you don't walk through it with a clipboard. You sleep under its roof, hear its night sounds, and let its children forget you're new. Brentwood Haven wasn't the kind of place that impressed from the curb. The gate creaked. The garden was more weeds than flowers, and the front porch light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to try or give up entirely. But to Maya Monroe, stepping out of the car with her tiny backpack and sketch pad, it was a castle waiting to be drawn. "This is where you grew up," she whispered, tugging at Sarah's coat as they walked up. Sarah looked down, hesitant. "It's where I survived." Maya tilted her head. "I think places remember when someone tries to love them, even if they don't know how." Caleb glanced at his daughter, then at Sarah. "You sure you want us here?" he asked. Sarah inhaled. "I don't think this works unless we all get our hands dirty." Margaret Hale opened the door before they knocked. Her expression, as always, was somewhere between an exhausted nurse and a disappointed headmistress. "You brought a child," she said, arms crossed. "She's not here to be studied," Caleb replied gently. "She's here to play." Margaret's eyes met his, and for a flicker of a moment something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Maybe even respect. "Fine," she muttered. But she paints on the back wall. The rooms at Brentwood smelled like old crayons and older memories. The walls were a patchwork of fading paint and fading hopes, but the children's laughter punched through all of it like sun through cracked blinds. Caleb was assigned a guest bunk in the counselor wing. Maya stayed with the younger girls. Sarah took the room she once called her own. Same chipped dresser, same uneven floorboard. She sat on the edge of the twin bed and ran her fingers over a carving in the wood she'd made as a child. Be more than they expect. Outside, voices echoed in the hall. Then a knock. "Dinner," Caleb's voice said softly. That first evening they ate macaroni and peas under a flickering light. A boy named Marcus tried to swap desserts with Maya, who politely declined by offering him a drawing of a dragon with asthma. Lena, the smallest and quietest girl, sat alone near the window. Maya asked if she wanted to color. "I don't make friends," Lena muttered. "They get sent away too fast." Maya, unbothered, slid her sketchpad across the table. "That's okay. You can borrow one." By the second day, Caleb had memorized the hallway creaks and fixed the broken faucet in the boys' bathroom. He taught 3 kids how to build a shoebox budget using Skittles as currency. Sarah, meanwhile, walked the grounds with a clipboard, but not for show. She listened to how the place breathed, where it wheezed, where it bled. She stopped when she found Maya and Lena chalking quietly on the sidewalk. Lena glanced up. "Is that lady your mom?" Maya shook her head. "No, but I think she's learning how to be someone's something." That night, Sarah stood outside watching the stars blink alive. Caleb joined her holding 2 mugs of weak cocoa. "You've changed since yesterday," he said. She took the mug, eyes still on the sky. "How you're quieter. Isn't that a good thing?" "It depends. Sometimes silence means we're finally hearing things. Sometimes it means we don't know how to speak yet." She looked at him. Really? Looked. "What about you, Caleb? What's your silence mean?" He didn't smile. Didn't blink. "It means I've seen too many people leave before they finished what they started." Day 3 began with rain. Buckets of it drumming on the tin roof like the sky was trying to scrub something away. The children were restless, the staff overwhelmed. So Caleb taught the kids how to make rain jars, tiny containers they could fill with wishes and pretend the storm was just the world listening harder. Sarah helped Maya and Lena build a theater out of cardboard boxes. They painted backdrops with cheap watercolors. When Lena hesitated to pick up a brush, Maya whispered, "It's okay to make something messy. That's how art says it was here." That afternoon, as the clouds cleared, Sarah sat in the common room reviewing the budget files Caleb had prepared. Numbers fell into tight, brilliant order. But it wasn't the precision that moved her. It was the humanity embedded in each line. He hadn't just suggested financial shifts. He'd written a language for measuring hope, emotional touchpoint index, caregiver warmth, variance, community return elasticity. She whispered aloud, "Who are you?" "Caleb Monroe." Behind her, his voice came steady. Someone who lost too much by keeping everything tidy. She turned. He was leaning in the doorway. "You're not just helping me with this project, are you?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm helping a place that made you." Later that night, after lights out, Maya snuck into Sarah's room in socked feet. "Miss Sarah, yes, honey." Maya climbed into bed beside her, a little flashlight in hand. "Lena says she's going to be moved to a new place soon. She's scared." Sarah's chest tightened. Why would they move her? She said too many places already said no. She's just waiting to be sent again. Maya turned on the flashlight. Its beam caught Sarah's face. "Can you help her?" Sarah swallowed. "I don't know if I can stop it." "But you fixed things before, right?" "Big things I've never fixed a heart, Maya." The little girl tilted her head. "Maybe you just need to ask it what it needs instead of what it can give." Sarah didn't sleep. She stood at the window till sunrise, watching the light crawl across Brentwood's cracked pavement. 3 days. That was all it took to see the difference between repairing a building and reviving a soul. And for the first time since her childhood, Serafina Langford made a vow in the language of dreams. She would not let this place lose another child to silence. Some children don't run away to be found. They run away to stop being forgotten. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm. Dinner had ended early that evening. The kids were unusually quiet, picking at their food, casting glances toward the empty chair by the window. Lena's chair. No one had seen her since afternoon crafts. Margaret Hale was the first to notice. She counted heads with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 nights in a row. "Where's Lena A?" beat of stillness. Then Maya stood clutching her sketch pad. She packed her little bag after lunch, she whispered. Said it doesn't matter if she makes friends because she always gets sent away anyway. Sarah shot up from the table. "What do you mean?" Sent away, Caleb's face turned to stone. He was already reaching for his coat. Margaret's lips pressed into a tight line. There was a transfer request pending. County Placement Review flagged her as low social integration. She overheard me on the phone. "She's 7, Caleb growled. 7, and she heard the system stamp her as broken. Maya tugged at Sarah's sleeve, eyes wide. She left a note. I found it on her bed. Sarah read it aloud, her voice thin. "If I stay, I'll just get returned. Maybe if I leave first, it won't hurt as much." The room went still. Then Caleb moved. "We need flashlights," he said, "and we need to split up." They searched in shifts. Sarah took the south field and the garden shed. Margaret scoured the art room and the attic where old bedding was kept. Caleb walked the perimeter, checking every fence line, calling her name like a prayer. Maya stayed awake in the main hall, clutching Lena's worn bunny doll, refusing to sleep until her friend came back. At 1:47 a.m., Sarah sat on the front steps, soaked in dew, head in her hands. "She's just a child," she whispered. "She's more than that," Caleb said, appearing beside her. "She's a mirror." Sarah looked up. Of what? Of every kid who's ever been passed over. Of every adult who learned to leave before being left. A pause. Then Caleb said, "I think I know where she went." 20 minutes later, they found her, curled beneath the rusted metal awning of an abandoned house 3 blocks from Brentwood. The house had long since been condemned, just a frame of memory and mildew. But to Lena, it was sacred ground. She was shaking, holding her backpack close like a shield. Her knees were tucked into her chest, and she didn't flinch when Caleb knelt beside her. "I wasn't stealing," she said softly, not looking at him. "I just wanted a place where no one would send me away." Caleb sat down beside her on the damp concrete. "You know," he said gently, "my wife used to say some places are haunted not by ghosts, but by promises that were never kept." She turned her face toward him slowly. "My mom slept here once," she said. "Right there, before the police took her. I used to think if I came back, maybe I'd see her shadow." Sarah approached quietly. She didn't say anything, just knelt in front of Lena and opened her arms. Lena stared. Then without a word, she dropped her bag and fell forward into Sarah's chest. And for the first time in years, Sarah cried. Not for the child in her arms, but for the child she once was. No one, Sarah whispered, should have to live waiting to be unwanted. Caleb's eyes glistened. He turned away so they wouldn't see. They walked back slowly, Lena between them, one hand in each of theirs. When they reached Brentwood, the porch light had burned out. But the door opened anyway, and Maya ran out barefoot, nearly tripping in relief. "You found her!" she cried, throwing her arms around Lena. The two girls held each other tightly, no words needed. Inside, Margaret waited. Her voice was unsteady. "I've already called the placement agency. Told them the transfer's been rescinded. She's staying." Lena didn't respond, but her grip on Maya's hand tightened. Later that night, Caleb sat alone in the rec room watching the glow of the emergency exit light dance on the ceiling. Sarah joined him, handing over a cup of tea. "Not cocoa this time?" he asked. "It's chamomile," she replied. "You looked like you needed something softer." He gave a tired smile. "You saved her," she said. "No," he answered. "She saved herself. We just showed up before she disappeared completely." Sarah sat beside him, quiet for a long time. Then she said, "When I was 12, I ran away too. Only made it to the bus stop, but I had it all planned out. I was going to walk onto that bus and never come back." "What stopped you, a janitor?" she said with a small ironic smile. "He just sat next to me and said, 'You don't have to disappear to be seen.'" Caleb looked over at her. "Smart man." "He was." Sarah nodded. No one remembered his name, but I did. Outside the window, the first light of dawn began to push against the edges of the sky. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You really think this place can change?" he asked. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "the only way to fix broken things is to stop pretending they weren't broken in the first place." She reached over, brushed dust off his shoulder. "And stop underestimating janitors who used to fix more than just floors. Some places break you. Others just hold the pieces long enough for someone to help you pick them up." The rain returned just after sunrise. It tapped gently against the dormitory windows like a ghost knocking with regret. Inside Brentwood Haven, things had returned to a fragile calm. The children ate breakfast more quietly than usual. Lena sat between Maya and Sarah, silent, but present her fingers threading through the frayed ears of her stuffed bunny which Maya had kept safe all night. But Caleb